you so much. How good is it to be like IRL, right? Is everyone? So I don't know about. Yeah, let's give these guys a hand because honestly, thank you so much. Just getting to see some of the work that went into putting this together, like doing a conference IRL, like it's safe and we're able to do this, but it's still a challenge to put it on during a pandemic with all the stuff that's going on. So props to you all. A lot of work went in, and you know, we all get to benefit from it. So thank you. Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but I've forgotten how to fly. When I was packing my bag to come up here, I'm like, hang on, does that go in the checked or the carry-on? I got on the plane and felt like I was doing a good job, but then all of a sudden I realised I was in the wrong seat. So clearly I'm not flight fit anymore. No, I was actually up the back, but it was like, sir, you're in my. Okay, fine, all good. So anyway, yeah, release the Hounds. 8 years is a long-ass time. That's the talk. And as I said, it feels like a billion years ago and yesterday when all this stuff went down in terms of the origin story of Bugcrowd. But really, you know, what I want to go through today, not to preempt the setup too much, but just to kind of talk through what it's like building a startup in this space, some of the things that we've seen around cybersecurity and around particularly crowdsourcing and multi-sourcing, the kind of thing that we do, and then we'll go from there. So where's this title come from? It's an early tradition of ours. Every time we'd launch a new program, we'd tweet, release the Hounds. You see the date there, May 15, 2013. And again, it feels like yesterday because there's been so much that's gone on in this space, but in reality, like it's a lot of time that's passed, including the pandemic, which felt like about a billion years. Let's keep moving. So who am I? Who's this dude struggling with laptops and is now selling a Mac laptop if anyone's interested? So my name's Casey Ellis. I'm the founder, chairman, and CTO of Bugcrowd, also the founder of the Disclose.io project. And I'm going to be hanging out outside or in the talks for the rest of the conference. So if anyone wants to come up and talk about either of those two things, I'm super keen to, as are the rest of the team. I forgot to ask that question. Who works for Bugcrowd here? All right, there's a few more hands this time. That's cool. So I've been basically in InfoSec since high school. Grew up, tearing apart technology and messing with it. As a kid, I think that was the product of an environment where I had a lot of tech to play with. My old man was a science teacher. But the other thing was that I always, and many of you I think will relate to this, I always really enjoyed thinking like a criminal, but had absolutely no desire to be one. So there was this kind of spark going on. It's like, I don't want to like hurt people and stuff, but that's really cool. And I really like thinking outside the box. And really to get into the security industry as a job, discovering that this was possible in the first place, that was like Christmas for me. And I'm sure that experience was similar for a lot of you all. It's like, I can do this and be legit. This is awesome. So yeah, we pioneered effectively the crowdsourced security as a service model. We didn't invent vulnerability disclosure. We didn't invent bug bounty. That's a whole other long kind of history conversation. But when it came to actually, basically doing this as a platform, we were the first ones to do it, and things have kind of escalated since then. So this talk is partly about that. I'm a proud Aussie husband. My wife is kicking around somewhere. Father of two, and lives in, I don't know where, somewhere. We've been living in San Francisco for the past 8 years. We actually bugged out almost a year to the day. Flew out on the 13th of March, basically seeing COVID coming over the hill in America, and that combined with having worked on elections and seeing how volatile that whole situation was, it's like it's going to be a rough year. So let's get to where we're close to family and get the kids into a better environment. Hopefully we'll get back there, but that's basically a work in progress at this point, as is true, I think, for a lot of people. It's a first world problem, but it's still been a pretty interesting 12 months, that's for sure. So what are we talking about? Been through this. What have we been through, or what have we been up to as an organization? What have we seen the industry do? Where is crowdsourcing and multi-sourcing up to now? What comes next? This is really a two-pronged talk, I think. What I want to do is to inform security folks, but then also try to appeal to the entrepreneurs in the room, right? Tell my story, help you guys understand Bugcrowd in our space, but then hopefully inspire some folks that are here to step out. The reason for doing that, I've been like literally walking Sand Hill Road for the past 8 years alongside building the company. And Australians are really, really good at this shit. But we're really terrible at realizing that, right? Like as a culture and as a nation, I actually think that we're almost uniquely talented when it comes to troubleshooting and coming up with cool solutions, but we also kind of suck at sales. because we don't like to self-promote. We don't like to necessarily overestimate ourselves, and kind of do ourselves out of the process, I think, as a result. So hopefully some of this story, I'm not that smart. Honestly, I just had to go and saw an opportunity, went for it, got a bunch of smart people around me to help build it, and it's kind of worked out. So you can do that too, is really the point that I'm trying to drive out there. All right, so back to this talk in the 1st of March 2013. Some of the slides, it's actually a fun one to go through, and it was sort of when I started talking to the Crikey guys about speaking here, I went back and had a look at it, because there's a lot of things that are different and a lot of things that are still the same. For example, the moment you launch a bounty program, you get 1 billion people telling you about demarc and clickjacking. That is still a thing. And it's not because there is a lack of skill in this space. I think it's because the number of participants who are on that kind of learning process and the ease of being able to identify that type of vulnerability, they just think it's the right thing to do, so they'll do that. Part of what Bugcrowd does is filters that out and actually trains them on how to be better, but that's very much still a thing. And you can see here 10 bounties. We actually ran some charity bounties early on. There was some not-for-profits that came to us and said, hey, we need security. I'm like, well, what can you pay the community? Nothing, we're a charity. Like, okay, let's see if that works. And the coolest story out of that was basically an organization that raised money to combat sex trafficking in Southeast Asia. We kind of teased out what the mission was and got people set up for it, then launched it, and we literally knocked them off the internet for like a day and a half because of the response. We then learned how not to do that, because obviously that's not something that you want to do if you're a security company. But to me, what that did early on was to speak to, I think, a lot of the misconceptions that the market had and just the general public had around hackers. Like, we're not bad people necessarily, some of us are. But to have an intrigue, to have a skill, to have a career in this space doesn't mean that you're someone to actually be afraid of. We're here to help, right? So that was pretty cool. General observations from that deck. This is, again, this is 8 years ago now, actually just passed. It's working. That turned out to be pretty accurate. Running an accelerated startup is wicked hard work. This is before we'd gone to Silicon Valley for the first time. So we'd raised a $50,000, what I refer to as the ramen noodle round, out of StartMate. And that basically paid for flights and accommodation in SF and about 3 beers, because it's kind of expensive over there. But that was kind of the jump start for us, and we were just about to fly over. Here's where, actually my office, where I started working on it myself, and then the first place that we landed on in SF. This is the platform in, what is this, 2012, December 2012. So this is actually a Kickoff Labs form that was meant for people to sign up on. The early proof that this was going to work was really when I sent out a couple of tweets and said, hey, we're going to try this thing. If you want to hack on some cool stuff, go sign up. And it blew up. In the terms of that particular period of time, we had about 4,000 people sign up over the next 2 weeks or so. So to me, that proved that the supply side and the people that are actually going to do this are there and they're willing. It's just a matter of plugging them in, right? And this is the first program. This was actually a shitty Rails app that I built. And I'm like, all right, I wonder if this works. So I basically got $500, put it out there, divvied up the reward so I wouldn't go over the $500 amount. And that was actually the origin of our crowdsourced pen test pricing model. Because if you've got a capped cost, you can't necessarily, what if you got $1 million? You've got to be able to answer that question. So this is where that got started. And it worked. It was incredible. I think the bit of proof, problem solution fit proof that came out of that was seeing someone basically inject a payload through the Twitter shortener into the back end that then rendered on a unlisted page to get a on mouse over XSS. I think it was something like that. So it's like not the end of the world, but that's some pretty creative stuff going on right there. And to be able to see that fall out because that particular person was good at that particular thing, it's like, okay, this works. This is cool. I think the other thing is that 2012, which is when this is all going down, it was a simpler time, wasn't it? I think it's before people. I'm actually going to talk about the journey to hackers becoming relevant and cybersecurity becoming dinner table conversation. This to me feels like it was before that. So we're all just kind of swanning around, doing our thing. trying to figure out how to make money and pay the bills and do all that kind of stuff. But I think there was a lot less of a business imperative on what we do then compared to now. And frankly, there was nice things about that. There's obviously opportunity that's come since, which is pretty awesome as well. So rip good times, but I remember them fondly. And really, this is the idea behind, I think, vulnerability disclosure, and it's not actually just us. So when I'm talking about this stuff, there's part of it's what BugCrowd does and how we do our thing. Part of it's just the space. At this point in time, there's, I think, 45 different platforms doing, baking a cake with roughly the same ingredients, is how I frame it, around the world. And that's because this just makes sense. As an organization, if you've got, an attack surface to defend, and ultimately you're tasked with being smarter with all of the adversaries that might come and bother you, and you're relying on single individuals, it doesn't necessarily matter how good or bad those individuals are. They're fundamentally disadvantaged because of the math. So okay, in the meantime, you've got the white hat community sitting there wanting to help, and there's this latent potential disconnected with this unmet demand. Like really, that was kind of the origin of the idea. The other thing was to try to get, stop people from going to jail, basically. It's like looking at a lot of the work we do with Disclosure is around just, policy advocacy. We're a part of writing the policies that we used to secure aspects of the 2020 general election in the US, which kind of worked, I guess. That was a joke. But seeing that ahead, and like hackers want to help out with this stuff, it's going to actually do a part to instill confidence in the American population, because the integrity of this election is going to come under attack. This is 2 years before all of the crazy shit went down in October. So and after that as well. So those are the things that we've really invested in and gotten into as an organization. So all right, that's the origin stuff. Next minute. One of the funny things that happened when I landed in SF, sitting with a Lyft driver who was Sudanese. He'd immigrated to the US, and we were talking about security because that just tends to happen when I ride in a Lyft with people. And he trotted out this amazing quote, like all security is the product of something bad happening, which I think, as a mental model and a framework to think about in terms of what we do is actually pretty useful. Folks aren't doing security poorly because they don't care or they don't want to. Half the time it's because they're so focused on the thing they're trying to do that it just gets pushed to the wayside. So that was kind of interesting. I got to thinking about that in terms of the market, and the same month that we landed in the US, that happened. I promise I had nothing to do with it. That's the caveat that I have to often give in the US, because Snowden, not to speak about any of the input or output of what he did, but what I do think happened as a product of this is that the general population saw it, and all of a sudden, rip good times. It's like hacking happens to me. This is a thing that I actually, need to have at least in some way on my radar now. I still don't really understand what's going on, but I know it is actually starting to affect me personally. And it kind of escalated from there. So in 2014, that was the year of the credit card breach, particularly in the US, but it happened right around the world. I think as EMV and chip and pin was starting to roll out, some of the gangs just kind of did their last hurrah on track 2 and dumps and different things like that. So Target got popped, all of the retailers. So now hacking happens to me personally. It's not just it happens, which is what Snowden taught people. It's like now it's me. And then this happened. This actually happened in the same year as the Opm breach, and there were some others as well that were basically uninsurable, right? So this clearly is, difficult to insure yourself against if you happen to get caught up in Ashley Madison. Opm was basically clearance data and records that were getting correlated with flight records and different things like that. So now it's hacking happens to me, and it hurts. My credit card company's not going to pay me back for that one, so this is starting to suck. Then this happened, 2016. Hackers are hacking, or hacking happens to my country. That I think was, and by the way, this is my observation that's quite North America centric, because that's where we were for all of this. But I do think there's some pretty broad analogs that happen right across the West over the same time frame. 27 to 2020, all right, cool. Software's eating the world, and the bad guys are eating the software. And here we are in 2020, actually in 2020, coming out of that into 2021, my employee's 5-year-old is responsible for my corporate attack surface. That's new. And actually a really interesting, for the folks that are thinking about this problem, I think there's a lot of scope. I don't think work from home is gonna go away. And I don't think we've really thought through what the impact of a home network is on corporate security to the extent that we think we have. And part of the evidence of that is the fact that like IoT and router ODA is now flying off the shelf, whereas before this it basically sat there because it wasn't as interesting. So the adversaries clued into this, which means it's going to occupy us at some point in the future as well. And this is really the idea. If it's repeated enough times at the dinner table, it actually makes its way to the boardroom. So it's not just about, hey, like CISO guy or person, CEO person, like security matters. If they're hearing about it from their kids or from their spouse or from their family, then all of a sudden it's top of mind. And I think that's actually driven, like we're in a pretty unique position now. I feel like when we started BugCrowd, you had to scream from the street corner to try to get 2 or 3 people to listen and pay attention to what you're talking about. Now they're coming to us, which is pretty interesting. And I think that's relevant not just for us and our space, I think it's relevant for everyone in this room. So what were we up to? This is the first office in SF, which is cool. I love that photo. It was just, that was like early on, it just felt good. Second office in Minna Street, this is as we're growing. Third, sorry, that was the second that I showed, then the third, this is the fourth on Front Street, which is where we are now. It's abandoned and all the plants are dead, but we'll eventually get back there. We've got an office in Sydney, Australia as well, and other places around the world. Basically where we're at is 198 employees, 80 million raised, 157,194 vulnerabilities nuked, just about to tip over 50 million US paid out to the supply side. About 250,000 people signed up on the platform. They're not, like, we don't have an army of 250,000 people. There's a difference between someone who signs up and someone who actually does stuff. So I'm calling out that distinction, but because these big numbers get thrown around, I wanted to add it in. And 480 customers, which have really focused on how do we take this idea of hackers and cybersecurity people being useful and having a constructive input into the entire market, not just like the nerds at Facebook and Google where this all kicked off, right? That was really our initial objective, was to jump out of I call it the lunatics validating the asylum in San Francisco, right? Like there's this kind of sandpit thing where you can prove stuff, but it doesn't necessarily validate the relevance of it to the broader market. So we did that, working with Department of Defense, working with DHS, National Australia Bank here in Australia, a whole bunch of others. So it's kind of broken out to the point where it's mainstream, and that's pretty cool. I'm not going to go too far into this, but yeah, I think one of the things that I spend a decent amount of time talking about right now is that it's not just bug bounty or VDP. Going back to the tug of war thing, it's actually about basically connecting people with questions to the folk that can answer them in whatever context. The concept of a bug bounty program got a tailwind in about early 2015 when Hack the Pentagon started up, and all of a sudden it was sexy, and we were spending a lot of time just trying to ride that wind. But what it also did was, I think, kind of included the fact that, no, there's pen test opportunity in this. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that you can do with a group of smart hackers if you can connect what you need done to the right person to actually do that work. And that's really what we're building and what we've built as an organization. This is kind of some of the stuff that we do. So I'll put this stuff online. I don't want to turn this into a pitch, so I'm not gonna drop down too far into this stuff right now. I think the other part of it, and this is going back to the folks that are straining to like change stuff. If you've got an idea, you've got this sense of wanting to pursue greater potential in this space, maybe do a startup, maybe it could be a range of other things. We've gotten to do some pretty amazing stuff. Like I mentioned the election thing before, working with Hack the Pentagon, like training people how to have a productive career in cybersecurity. One of my favorites is literally diverting young people that have like an ability that's actually outpaced the growth of their moral compass and kind of diverting them from what would probably turn into a life of crime. Because that's a thing, right? You get a 15-year-old who does something stupid, they're not trying to be a bad guy, they just do their thing. and all of a sudden they get dinged for it, and it sets them off down the wrong track. So getting to kind of divert that, I think, is a pretty interesting aspect of all of this. Yeah, thank you. And honestly, we're all a part of that, because I think the cybersecurity industry, that's not just an opportunity for BugCrowd, I think that's an opportunity for all of us, because of the stuff I just talked about. We're dinner table conversation now. So training's pretty key. Oh, and also, we have an advanced services group in Australia, and in case you haven't heard, we're hiring. So I'm gonna move on from that one too. So we'll get to conclusion stuff. How long have I got? Because I'm a little off. 15? Okay, cool. Got thrown with the front bit a little bit there. That's all good. So really my observation in terms of talking to, now that we're, I think, in a better position to say what a CISO actually is and what they do, I think we're still in the position where CISOs in 2021 are a little bit like CIOs in like 2005. It's the nerd in the boardroom that doesn't quite know why they're there, and the other people don't quite know why they're there. And we're still going through that journey of basically establishing a common language. That's not anyone's fault, by the way. It's because it's new. But how does security deliver value back into a business in a way that the business understands? So elevating the conversation just from vulnerabilities and hacks and breaches and all these different things to say, okay, how does this fit into risk? Like, how do I think about this in terms of differentiating myself to make my customer feel safer so I can sell more stuff? There's all of these different things that the business is actually starting to look at right across the board that are also pretty new. I think prior to 2017, like risk-based security was this thing the cool kids talked about. And then I noticed literally at a Gartner conference in DC, it shifted pretty quickly, mostly because I think people in management kind of came to this acceptance that I'm not going to fix all this shit. Like, there's so much to do, and there's such a continuous evolution of things that need to be protected, detected, or responded to, that unless I prioritize and think about it in context of the business value of doing those things, I'm actually not going to get around to all of it. So that's not going to work. And that, to me, is really the trend in terms of the overall thinking that the market's taking an opportunity for us, right? The better we can explain ourselves to people, the better we can actually help them do their thing and turn this into a partnership between builders and breakers. Like, ultimately, that, to me, is the end game of stuff like BugCrowd. It's not about just finding bugs and kicking people down the stairs and having a bit of a laugh. It's actually about helping them think a little bit more the way that we do, and vice versa, so that we can think more about their priorities and start to give them feedback more intelligently. As a CISO, it's the financial risk side, it's the political risk side, and that goes to being able to talk about what you're doing around security to the market, but internally as well. And then there's obviously the technical piece, which we mostly focus on. What that means for us is that humility, empathy, and skill are really the preeminent qualities that are actually going to, not just, I think, this is not just for the sake of being a good human in this space. I think this is actually really valuable in terms of how you kind of elevate what you're doing, elevate your ability to give input. And if you're an entrepreneur, elevate your ability to create something that's actually incredible and powerful, right? So I'm going to pause for water for a sec here. So let's talk about some other observations. So 2015 was like peak crazy for venture in Silicon Valley. It's like when all the VCs suddenly realized, oh, people are getting hacked, we should put some money into this. And AI is a replacement for humans forever. People were selling that type of thing. It doesn't work like that to begin with, and they've since realized that. But I think what it did was leave this lasting impression that that's possible. So those kind of pitches still work. I think the broke way of thinking is that technology is going to make all this go away. I just need to spend enough money on it and it'll be fine. The woker way of thinking about it is that it's a people problem. To me, like, security, people making mistakes that create vulnerabilities predates the internet by a couple of thousand years, right? Like, we didn't invent that idea. And then people taking advantage of that is also a pretty old concept. So really what's happened is we've just accelerated it with tech, and that's how we think about it. Broke, VDP is a marketing stunt, so the whole idea of, hey, TechCrunch, I'm launching a vulnerability disclosure program, aren't I awesome? It's good. Like, I think there's a genuine benefit in being able to make that statement to the public, but I think the more powerful thing that happens is when you go out and say, you know what, we're not perfect. And guess what, no one is. We see that every single day. Like, even the most, the organizations you perceive as the most secure aren't. because QED, like people make mistakes, right? I think that statement is actually a really powerful thing for the organization to get its arms around, because all of a sudden you can improve, because you're not so busy, doing ostrich risk management and trying to pretend it's all not there, right? Bug bounty is a silver bullet. Woke, bug bounty is a way to internalize the boogeyman is real within the organization. So if an engineering team is learning about how their code's been broken by some kid halfway across the world, all of a sudden, they're starting to think about their next door neighbor and what gangs might operate in their neighborhood and all that other stuff. There's a different impact, I think, to seeing stuff come in from the outside world to even internal work. Even though internal work is incredibly powerful and important, I'm not denigrating it. There's just a different thing that you activate when it comes in from the outside. And if you attach a price to that, all of a sudden it becomes quantifiable. So that's pretty cool. Total payouts is a vanity metric. Like, this is literally broke. So you see people that launch a bug bounty program and it's all about how much they can pay out. There's upside to that because you engage more people because folk want to get paid. The downside to it is it doesn't really say good things about your security program. And it doesn't necessarily encourage the right behavior. Like, you want to be paying the right amount to break into your stuff. And this is how I think about it, hopefully in a more woke way. It becomes a proxy cost for how much money does it cost to incentivize someone to break into my business and be successful? If you can chart that over time, all of a sudden you've got a metric you can use in the boardroom, and it has a dollar sign, so they'll actually read it, which is good. Boards are tough. Pen test is an assurance-only model. I think, where I've seen this move, this is in our context, but I think I've seen it talking to a lot of pen test firms and other people in that industry. Assurance and impact. So thinking about it less as a compliance activity or something that, is primarily focused on making sure you checked all the things. It's like, no, I want to actually use this as a tool to assess my overall risk as an organization, factoring in the interdependencies I have, factoring in the fact that, some bugs are harder to find than others. Some kill chains take a bit more effort to discover and require different ways of thinking than someone that's just running through a list. Like, what I'm seeing from the market is a real lean into wanting to see that output. That's always been kind of true in the pen test industry, I think. But I also do feel like there's players that have come in and diluted it and just turned it into this like checkbox business activity. Like, we can do better than that, I think. And I think there's an appetite starting to form for that, which is pretty cool. And that creates those feedback loops I was talking about before. This is a new entrant. China wouldn't bother with my stuff, or Russia, or whoever else. I think, to me, like, I'm not going to talk about supply chain attacks because everyone's doing that. But the thing that the SolarWinds breach, I think, demonstrated to folk was like, that's a nation state, and they came after me. If you're threat modeling in a way that just assumes that you're not going to be interesting enough to an actor like that, I think it kind of proved that that's not entirely true. So, woke is how do I detect and contain a nation state assuming they're successful? So building it like it's broken. And then coming back to the VDP piece, like security@domain.com to dev null. The folks that have tried to report vulnerabilities, that's why I was asking that before, have probably experienced this. Half the time it's like shouting into a black hole because people either aren't listening or don't know how to respond. What we've tried to do with Disclose.io is to basically simplify that in terms of standardization of policy language, creating safe harbor to make sure that no one feels like they're going to go to jail, but also that the organization feels like they're not inviting bad guys to do bad things or bad people to do bad things as a part of putting that policy up. We've got a bunch of other stuff. This is an open source project. It started with BugCrowd. We had a version of it that then merged with a version out of the Berkeley UC, and it's basically rebranded so we can push it all forward. So if you're interested to talk about that, I'm pretty passionate about this. I want to see it work because I want to see this become normal. For our input just to be like not even offensive anymore. It's just like, yeah, okay, cool. Here's the thing I need to fix. That's awesome. Like, let's work together to make the internet better. So in summary, good things happen when you step out. I think that's the, and Chris, give us a wave. Co-founder back there. Thanks, dude. Some of the other folk in the room, like, you take a risk. It's a measured risk. You're in security. Like, the worst case scenario is you come back and get some sort of role that you're not a massive fan of, probably land that pretty easily and then figure out what you're going to do from there. So there's risk that's available for you to fall back into if you want to step out and start to work on some stuff. And again, come chat to me about that because I always get jazzed up. Our industry is only just getting started, and I do think Aussies kick ass at this stuff. Hence, go forward and be rad. Grace Hopper T-shirt. We've got a bunch of stickers around as well because we accidentally created a swag company that sort of dabbles in cybersecurity. I don't know how that happened. We do like swag parties and kind of hack some stuff on the side. But there's a bunch of bug crowders around. Come up, grab one, say hello, do all that sort of stuff. And really, we're here to. I'm here today to basically answer whatever I can and just hang out, obviously, as an attendee. But to the degree that you guys can, get something useful from my experience, I'm happy to share it. So feel free to come say hi. And that is the end of my talk.
Hey, Casey, that was great. Thank you very much for keynoting us today. One of the questions I had around it is you've kind of gone from the, crowdsourcing pen testing approach. What does it look like or have you had thoughts around crowdsourcing like a defense approach?
Yeah, so we've experimented with this. The prior art around this is the defensive mitigation program that Katie Moe did at Microsoft, actually quite a while back now. The challenge with defense is that it's more difficult to have context on regression. So coming in and saying, here's how you fix a bunch of stuff, as someone who's coming in from the outside, you can have a pretty good idea of what's going on under the hood, but not necessarily a complete one. But yeah, I think it's something that we've been working on in terms of crowdsourcing, for example, the generation of WAF rules, talking to people about recommendations. We have an open source recommendation library basically that maps to the vulnerability rating taxonomy. So that's sort of crowdsourced as well in a way. It's a good question. I think where I see offense is a really logical place to apply this model because it's kind of all care and no responsibility in a way, which does lend itself to being able to distribute and to be able to throw a piece of information over the fence for people to then go off and use. The big thing is that you can't just stop there. Because if an organization's taking that and it's not of value to them, then you have to extend that. So, yeah, it's a long answer to a short question, but hopefully got there.
So, continuing that theme, and I'm just asking questions until someone else puts their hand up here. Thinking about your slides at the start, I agree, 2012 is the good old days, and that's awesome. And then I think about this week, right, with the exchange vol and that going from 0 to 100 in like 5 minutes. That sort of stuff now, where orgs are like, there is no time from disclosure to go. By the time you literally grab your coffee and have logged in, it's too late, sort of thing. Do you see any impact around that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think it's really prioritization. We had an issue come in from the Tencent team to Tesla that was like a full chain on the car, and they had that. They received it. They engineered a fix. They had it fully deployed out to their entire fleet over OTA in 11 days, right? Which is that doesn't happen by accident. So the thing with those folk, they started running a program actually with us about 6 years ago at this point. And part of what that gave them the ability to do was to figure out where is the low-hanging fruit, where are the things that can be seen from the outside. As they added incentives, how do I dig people in deeper to figure out what the outside-in view looks like? And that allowed them to basically spend more of their time on the proactive stuff, like architecting a regression program and an OTA service to get all the cars patched if they needed to in a hurry. So, I think that's how this fits in. I think can a crowd come in and boot defenders out? I like the idea of basically crowdsourced threat hunting. In a sense, there's some sense to that, I think, and also probably to call out as well that we're actually doing a lot of point-to-point work as well. So the whole idea of crowdsourcing as a model, that's really good for driving people down to get impact. Not to go back too much to the pitch slide, but basically finding the right people to do the right thing and engaging them one-off on a task or an effort basis is something that we do as well. So there's lots of ways to cut the cookie. Yep.
Cool. Someone's got to, yep.
Up the back.
I'll start here and then we'll go up the back.
I love what you guys do. I guess just in the context of companies that have previously taken legal action to try and prevent the bugs getting out there, or even researchers doing their work, are you seeing much of a downward trend in that sort of attitude from different industries?
What I'm seeing, it's not so much a downward trend as it is an upward trend of people being proactive to say we could do better.
Yeah.
I think that's the traditional reaction. We're coming off 30 years of people assuming they can legislate attackers away from their staff, which is increasingly provably untrue at this point in time. So focus thinking about that, right? But then you've got stuff like the Department of Homeland Security with their Binding Operational Directive 2001, which we're a part of helping write. So that forces every federal agency in the US to start a VDP, and it has things in there like proactive coordinated vulnerability disclosure and hacker safe harbor for basically exemption against CFAA and DMCA and things like that. So the more of that stuff happens, I think the less the dark side of it will go down, because it becomes more obviously an uncool thing to do. I think part of what we're trying to do with Disclose.io is to actually make it something that people can almost market. It's here's the green padlock for the internet in terms of my maturity as an organization to receive feedback from the outside world. If you get consumers to the point where they're looking at that and saying, I feel safer working with that person than this person, then I think it's going to accelerate. So yeah, that's some of the stuff that's going on.
Hey, Casey.
Hey.
So, have you ever had a threat actor pose as a company to try to get you to do some hacking on their behalf? And whether you've had that, how did you deal with it, or what do you do to prevent it or minimise that risk?
We've definitely. So I'll answer the end of that first, because it's probably the broadest part of the answer. We check everything. So we're not. It's not a click start process on the platform, and we kind of. It's more expensive. It's more painful for us to orchestrate it like that. But for the sake of the safety of everyone involved on both sides, that's just a design decision that we decided to make. Plus, this is often hard to do, so it's understanding where people are actually up to and helping them through the process of writing a policy and preparing and all that kind of stuff. That's where we insert ourselves. So if anything looks weird coming through that process, that's when it'll get flagged. It's not, I can't think of a threat actor specifically. We've booted people off the platform for basically just exploiting the crowd or doing the wrong thing in that sense. We've pretty proactively taken a stand against different industries. There was a spousal spyware thing that they got hacked and basically responded saying, we're going to launch a bug bounty program. We're going to talk to HackerOne and BugCrowd. And we basically turned around and said, no, you guys can go die in a fire, because that's you shouldn't exist. So stuff like that is, thank you. It's laterally addressing your question, I think. In terms of, Russia or China or, an APT actor trying to do that stuff, we haven't seen that. We've seen things, if anything even smells like that, we'll dig right into it to make sure that it's kosher. So that's how we operate.
Do you think it's actually getting harder, post DMCA, where you're seeing vendors of products putting anti-pen testing stuff into the contracts you're signing, and it's just more challenging to kind of bring them in, do the pen tests on the product, find the bugs, and then have it be reported through whatever back up to them without having legal challenges coming back down?
Yeah. So Votes was a pretty good example of that. There was a blockchain voting company that decided they could solve the 2020 election before it all caught on fire, basically. And then a bunch of researchers from the University of Michigan, I think, kind of tore their stuff apart and said, y'all shouldn't be doing this, especially with such a short window. And honestly, with a country that at that point in time was under so much tension, it's just a terrible idea. Let's not. They went down the route of using CFAA and DMCA to basically suppress that research. So it's still a thing that happens. That was last year. It's still very much a thing that happened. Off the back of that, we actually, through the group that worked with Disclose.io, put together an open letter. Jim Langman, who's a congressperson, signed it, and a whole bunch of other folk. And we pretty soundly kind of hit him on the head and said, don't be going there, because we've worked really hard to help everyone understand that hackers are here to help, not just to harm. And you're actually damaging that part as well as potentially democracy. So let's just maybe not do that. But yeah, to your question, it's still very much a thing that happens. I think there is this, this general idea. I think this is relevant to everyone, not just the hunters and whatever else, because ultimately this is what we're doing to deal with our adversary here, right? There's this idea that if it's in the law that it's illegal to hack my stuff, then for some reason the adversary is going to read that law and obey it, even though they're not in the same country half the time, and whatever else. It's silly, and I think being able to call it out like that without making people feel stupid in the process is part of what we've been trying to do. It's not like, hey, you're an idiot, stop thinking that because it's dumb, because that's not helpful. It's more like, no, here's how this works in real life, and here's a better way. Like, here's the carrot, do you want that? Instead of trying to come in with the stick. So, yeah.
Hi. I'm just thinking outside of the box a bit here. You're mainly with bug bounty. I assume you're looking at people coming in from the outside. But in the last 2 months, we've had major intrusions in Brisbane at sites I'm maintaining, right, where people are sowing from an email something, yeah, and something I've never seen before. This thing has started like Battleship Galactica. It's gone through, not through all the shared folders, but right through the entire operating system, right through all the servers, just bloody demolished everything in the site. Now, are you doing anything about? And I assume you'd call that a Trojan in a way, because it's gone in. It was set to run at 3 a.m. Saturday morning, and just went through and just boom. Now, I fortunately I've got a honeypot collector which basically held it, so I just watched this thing go, and I was able to stop it, but not after massive destruction within 2 hours. Yeah. Have you got anything that works to manage that? Because you've got, see, once someone's inside the network, and you can do anything you want. Yeah. How do you stop that? I mean, what have you got to? So
this is and it kind of goes to what I was saying before. People hear bug bounty and they think, and bug crowd, obviously they're sort of in the name. So that's the noisiest version of what we do. It's about 15% of what happens on the platform. The rest of it's private. And that's a combination of private external, private internal, pay for effort, internal, doing things like simulations, like basically starting to build in like crowdsourced threat modeling into the process to be able to help you get ahead of that stuff. Like in terms of, I've just double clicked on malware, can you help me stop it? No, basically, and I don't think anyone in the offensive space could reasonably say yes to that, because that's more an issue of preparedness and design, like blast radius containment, stuff like that. But what we can do is say, all right, if this was to get loose, what would happen? What are the shorter paths in terms of like broader network exploitation that are available that you should probably mitigate next? And then to be able to do that on a continuous basis. So an example of that was the Air Force cloud computing environment. We did a source code review on the systems that are basically pushing workloads up into that. That's like a TSSCI SCIF environment for them, and we did testing on that, bouncing around on the inside of there. We've bounced around on the inside, like we've got basically jump boxes and work into a lot of pretty interesting places, and ones that you wouldn't and probably shouldn't honestly do a bug bounty. In terms of going out to the open market and saying, hey, yo, come hack us and we'll pay you, they're not in a position where that's even necessarily a good idea. But they can access the right kind of talent for their environment from a broader audience, and then we can basically drop them off, vet the talent, make sure people are trustworthy. Like if it's government work, you're going to have like validation of sovereignty and all those sorts of things that come into it as well. That's all a part of how it works. Yeah.
So there's one more up the back. We'll do that as the last one.
Awesome.
Hi. You talked earlier about.
Sorry, can you just wave at me? I can't see. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
You talked earlier about sort of you're really excited about the opportunities to divert young people who might otherwise sort of go to a life of crime into sort of more productive roles within the information security industry. What are your views on how those sorts of people, those young people who maybe are leaning towards less savoury kinds of action, how that's talked about? What are your views on how that's talked about in public, in the media and in the industry?
I hate it.
Are there things you think that are problematic or sort of alienating those people and pushing them away from productive opportunities? And are there positive things, positive ways you think we could talk about that?
That's a really important and a really good question. I honestly think that my wife and I went to a conference in Canberra a couple of years back, and there was a person talking about a 15 or a 16-year-old that they'd gone and conducted an operation on and arrested, and it was so like disparaging and just completely almost blind to the circumstances of this like minor, right? And that to me is not, I can understand why it happens because it's a fun story and whatever else, and I think the sense of a win from having stopped a bad actor from doing a thing, okay, fine. But if you're talking about someone who's basically arrived at this position out of need, and not necessarily arriving at that position out of a deliberate decision to be, to do the wrong thing or to be a bad person, you're really kind of throwing everyone else in the same bucket that could be in that position, like the precursors to that. So I think in general, what I've seen is that the idea of, people kind of get this thing that there's like a digital equivalent of locksmith and a burglar. We've been dealing with locks for a long time, so everyone kind of gets that part, but the cyber version is still novel. I feel like we've made a lot of progress in just kind of the core understanding of what we do. But as it relates to youth, I think there's a lot of stuff that gets said that's very careless. That said, I think there's a lot of things that are pretty incredible in terms of promoting it as well. So, Roots Asylum in DEF CON, like I take my kids to that. They love it. My son loves to pick locks, and my daughter's more of a I want to go through code type of person. So that's cool, like starting to see like where their particular hacker quirks might be and pulling those things out. And it's positive, it's celebrated. You tell people that you've taken your kids to a hacker conference and they freak out. And I think that's a really productive conversation to have. Because at that point as the parent, I can then explain that, no, this is what I'm doing. Like this is actually something that's incredibly important to the future of all of us, not just me or them. And they seem to be leaning into it, so I want to try to help that. So hopefully that answers your question. I think just in general, it's not something we're thinking about enough. So that's a really cool question. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Casey, please.
Thank you all.